Hello and welcome to another virtual session on Microsoft 365 topics, where today we're going to be talking about collaborate more closely with external partners, creating and using guest access in Teams. My name is Nathan Austin. I'll be presenting the content today, and behind the scenes, Stephanie Kingsley is producing. She'll be and staffing the Q&A panel. So one of the things I always like to mention at this juncture is that the Q&A panel is open right now. So if you have any questions or thoughts or problems you're trying to solve, please go ahead and start posting those in the Q&A. We're going to address those at the end of the session. There's about 30 minutes of content that we'll go through that's pretty prescriptive to help you think through using guest access and showing you how to create guest access in Teams. However, at the end, we're going to open up to Q&A, and we'll stick around as long as people have questions. So very much looking forward to that. So without further ado, let's dig in. And for those, by the way, for those of you who notice, this is one of the first sessions, I think, if not the first session I've done with a headset. Not that I'm touting the headset, but one of the things, it's very cool. It connects to my handset and my office desk line, my laptop, and my mobile phone. So no matter where people might be calling me, I can access it from this headset. So it's kind of cool. Anyway, little piece of trivia. So let's move on to what we're going to cover today. So really, we're going to be talking about external collaboration using guest access. There's a lot of external collaboration that can be done using OneDrive, one-on-one collaboration. We're specifically going to be talking about prescriptive collaboration methods for guest access in Teams, so group collaboration. So if you look at the two bullets there, the first couple items there is we're going to review group scenarios for potential guest access. We're not really going to be digging into or touching on one-to-one. If I'm collaborating with one person externally, it's more if I'm a member collaborating with a group of people, whether it's an internal group and or an external group. So we'll demonstrate some of the different guest access methods. There's really only a couple when it relates to Teams and guest access, but there's some important distinctions that we'll go through and make sure you understand, because the actual act of adding someone as a guest is relatively straightforward, and you probably already know how to do it. So we're going to talk through not only how to do that, but some different scenarios to think through so you can try and apply those different variables to your unique situation that you might be trying to solve or unique problem you're trying to solve. And then, of course, as I mentioned at the end, I'll open it up for Q&A and some recommended next steps, a couple steps as a prescription there. So before we dig into that, though, we like to cover just a little bit about MyTech. We are a business and technology consulting organization. We really only work with small and medium businesses. We've been in business 20 years, and over those 20 years, we've learned a lot about what technology works well together and what can achieve proven results for our clients. It doesn't mean that's the only way to do it, because there's lots of ways to do technology, but it's one of the ways in which we've found that is a prescriptive method that we know that working with our clients allows us to, working together, achieve proven results, and that's the idea. Demonstrate return on investment. In the end, our goal is to make IT easy for you by removing IT challenges. And in that, what our goal is as an example, with any type of challenge you might be facing, working remotely, et cetera, is that you can focus on serving your customers better and being more adaptable to the other business challenges that we all face. And together, we know that our clients can achieve 4 times more value and productivity from their IT investments. And we do have measurements around that. And if you're curious about what that looks like, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out and we can talk a little bit more about that. But that's not why you're here today. So let's dig in to different scenarios for potential guest access. Okay. Well, here's just a few examples. They all have similarities, though, as far as some of the ways that we've used guest access and we've seen guest access used, is if you're collaborating on an event with external parties, that whether that's vendor partners that are contributing to the event or a co-host. Either way, you oftentimes are having meetings, document sharing and collaboration, et cetera. And so those are ways in which you can use guest access for external partners. We also have a peer group that we participate in as an organization at different levels in our organization. So Teams can be used for peer group collaboration as well. Again, same kind of concept. It's meetings, virtual meetings, sharing documents, et cetera. But all of them also have a sense of security around it too. And that's a key variable that we're going to be talking about today, is that one of the negatives of being able to share documents is that you want to make sure that you restrict to whom and with whom you can share them. So we will be covering that. Board of director communication, collaboration, being able to use Teams for that. We have a whole nother session that we did on that, so I'm not going to go too deep, but it's similar characteristics that we didn't want to leave out here today. Again, remote participation in meetings, sometimes it's as simple as that. Like you're collaborating with folks and you want to be able to pull them in. Key document sharing and collaboration. And one of the things that we've heard also from some of our partners and nonprofit members in particular is volunteer coordination. If you're trying to collaborate with we've had referees or coaches or parents, depending on an association or group, and or nonprofits as far as volunteer events and or volunteer, volunteering at the respective organization. So those are oftentimes the key things that we're finding as far as guest access scenarios. And again, I'm focused primarily on group versus one-on-one or individual collaboration, one-to-one collaboration. So that's the focus of today. The next step is I want to take a brief reprieve before we get into a bit of the demonstration and talking through some of these scenarios to talk about an important understanding that needs to exist prior to delving down this path, which is security roles. We also did a session earlier in July where we talked about the key roles that really exist inside of the Microsoft 365 world and environment. I'm not going to go as deep as that event did, but this is an important designation that if you're going to be deploying guest access and you want to know who has the authority to create that and who can help manage that, well, this is a brief guide to help you understand what those capabilities and requirements are. So first and foremost, as a little bit of a public service announcement, is that the ability to enable sharing externally or creating guest access resides solely with the global admin. So if you're planning on creating guest access, you really need to work with whomever is the global admin. For our clients, that is us. We can actually help you create that. But from there, we can actually designate power users, which are folks inside your organization, to be able to take it and do the rest of everything we're going to talk about today from there. So, but the first step is, once you've identified that you want to enable guest access and you want to be able to share externally, that has to be enabled at the global admin level. Because by default, all these capabilities are there, but Microsoft turns off sharing by default. Or at least when we set them up, we turn it off by default. I'm not sure if it's a Microsoft default or a MyTech default. Either way, knowing that you don't want to just enable guest access for everything, you want to be very specific about doing that so that you're not sharing information with the wrong groups of folks. So digging into the power users, an important designation. We also have events that we're hosting once a month that are specifically targeted towards these individuals. These are people in your organization that can definitely help connect the dots as far as the business problem you're trying to solve and the technology options that are available and helping you navigate. We're able to do that, help you with this too, but they can help navigate, well, what's the best way to help you solve this problem? Because there's almost always more than one way to do it. And one of the things that if you are a global admin and you're trying to search for, well, what's the power user permission? That is not a Microsoft setting. This is something that we have defined, and we've basically created a structure so that, because we want our clients to be as autonomous as they want to be, as they can be. And so enabling a power user that once certain permissions are granted at the global admin level, they can really run with everything. And so the power users, I would encourage you to think about who those power users might be in your organization, and we'd be happy to have them at our power user sessions, but also we'd want to make sure they have the appropriate permissions so they can help you walk through and create this structure as it might fit your organization. So then down to group or team owners, these are maybe department heads or department managers. So let's say, for instance, the marketing team is collaborating on an event and they want to be able to collaborate with an external partner. The power user would help consult on the structure that would make sense. The global admin would actually set the initial permissions, but the power user that would then be able to enable one of the marketing team members to be a team owner or the group member or the group owner, which means that they can then add the guest access as appropriate. They want to work with A, B, or C people, and they can then kind of manage it from there. So once the global admins and the power users has set the department heads or the team owner up for success, they can actually back out and they don't have to be part of every single day-to-day change or adjustment. So that's where the team owners come into play. So it's really, we really appreciate how Microsoft has done that. It really empowers the right people to be able to make the changes without having to necessarily go to IT every time or the power users every time. And of course, users is the general designation, or team members as we like to call them. That's pretty much everyone in your organization that doesn't have one of those other designations. And then guests, which we are going to be talking about today, which are any external individuals or people you may have invited to interact. So these are some of the key security roles, because all of these have the ability to have some different permissions and rights assigned. And so at a high level, we want people to understand these variables as we dig into talking about guest access. All right. Okay. So with that understanding, and by the way, I'm happy to answer more questions on that. So if you have any right now, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. So let's dig into some of the demonstration of guest access collaboration methods. So I am going to reference my notes so I don't forget to touch on a few things. So I'm going to show you a couple of the variables that I was just talking about with Teams. All right, so I'm going to go to Teams, and I'm going to pull this over here into my window. Okay, so we already have a couple teams here that I wanted to start with. So we have a guest access team and a board of directors. These teams are already set up for external collaboration or guest collaboration. So one of the things I wanted to walk through, again, in addition to illustrating that the initial creation of these teams is either done by a global admin, or this is one of the reasons why we defined and built a permissioning structure for what we call power users, is because the power users are able to then create these teams and make sure that the structure is built in alignment to how Office 365 is designed to work, or Microsoft 365 is designed to work. And so again, the initial creation of these teams and the fact and giving them permission to enable guest access comes from the global admin, and then if the global admin has allowed it, then the power user can then also create and assign that. So, okay, so that's a start. I think that's important to make sure we understand that. And also, as we walk through, once you create a team, as many of you are already familiar, it's also creating a respective SharePoint site. So for instance, I'm going to pull this over this guest access team. If I notice that I'm on the Files tab up here, right? And this document exists here. One of the things that I like to click on is Open in SharePoint. I actually have already done that. And you notice here's the guest access team SharePoint site with that exact same file in it as before. So we're going to come back to this in a little bit, but I want to illustrate, because as I create another structure, I'm going to show you how it's a little different, so that you can be aware of that as you plan out your guest access structure. Okay. So let's start by the fact that this, the membership permissioning level. So if you have a team, anyone at the parent level has access to every channel, all these sub channels. Okay, so I'm going to click here on the ellipse, and I'm going to say Manage Team. So you'll notice that I'm designated as the owner, but there are members and guests here, and you can see over here on this designation that you see guests and versus members. Members are internal folks, guests are external. If you're going to add those, so since this team does have the permission to be able to add external parties, you will be able to go up here and click Add Member, just like you can just if you're adding internal members, and you can type in any given name, you know, Sally Smith, you know, etc. Right? I'd have to type in an email address, of course, but that's how you can add new members. And you would not even be able to add an external member if this team didn't already have the global setting of being able to add external members. Once you've done that, though, the same, and again, I'm not going to dig into all the capabilities and functionality of teams and collaboration because we have lots of other sessions that we've done on that. But basically, once you've added them, they will, the members and guests will have access to the posts, they'll have access to the files, and any other tabs that you may have created or built out into your team structure. So that's important to note as far as that goes. And there's one other thing I was going to mention about the posts. It'll come back to me. I just forgot. I had it and it slipped my mind. So I'm not going to, again, dig into the capabilities of Teams in that regard, but I definitely wanted to show you that the important designation that once you've created a guest access team, they have access to everything underneath. What I want to show you right now is one of the options that you might consider, again, it's just variables and options and methods that you can do this, is by possibly creating a private channel. So let's say, for example, like for instance, if I use the board of directors as an example, is that everyone on the board of directors has access to the general, finance committee, and strategic planning, but there might be a subgroup on the board of directors that's dealing with more highly confidential information that I create a private channel. You can see this little lock icon right here. That designates that this is a private channel, and you have to be a member of the board of directors team in order to be added to the private channel. But not everyone, when you create this channel, not everyone is by default added. So that's an important designation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and show you how to create that if you haven't seen that before. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the breadcrumbs here, the ellipse. I'm going to say add channel. So I'm just going to identify this is a private channel. Just call it that. And then if you notice right here, it gives you the option of automatically show this channel in everyone's channel list. That's if it's a standard channel, but I'm not making it a standard channel. I'm turning it into a private channel. So I got to click this little drop down and I have to move it to private. So once I do that, that option disappears and I click next. And as I add the channel, it takes some time because what it's doing right now is actually adding the channel, applying the permissions, and it's also creating an associated SharePoint site. And I'll show you that momentarily. So I'm just going to add, I'm actually going to add Gerald. Excuse me, Gerald. Now notice I can add Gerald externally, his MyTech email address, or we actually have the demo account for him here too. So I'm just going to add his regular account here. I'm actually going to add Stephanie, but I'm going to add her external one. I'm going to add her MyTech account here. So I'm going to click on that. Notice it designates her as a guest, and I'm going to click add. So it's adding her as a guest, right? And I'm going to say done. So now that I've done that, this private channel pops up. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is because when you go to the files section, and I'm just going to go, I don't have any files in there yet, I just created it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on open in SharePoint, right? So I'm going to show you open in SharePoint, and it's going to open up another window, and it's going to name guest access team hyphen or dash private channel. I'm going to click on the tab here that I have. So the guest access team here, when I go into documents, it actually is going to show me the two folders the two different channels that I have. Whereas when I create a private channel, it actually creates a completely separate SharePoint site. That's important to understand from a permissioning perspective and a structure perspective. So if I go back here into Teams and look at the guest channel, the general and the vendor partner A channels are accessible to anyone on the team, and thus when you have the SharePoint site associated with it, these are just subfolders on the SharePoint site as designated. As I pull this up, oh, here we are, as designated here, right? So this is the guest access team site. The general channel and the vendor partner A channel folders are just subfolders in that channel. However, when you create a private team, I pulled up this other tab, it actually creates, it's a name, guest access team, which is the same core name, and then private channel, or whatever the name is of the private channel. So that's an important designation, because if you're trying to set up guest access, but yet you're also trying to control who has access to information, if you don't want the guest to have access to everything in this channel, or you only want a subset of your guests to have access to this channel, that's one of the ways in which you can do that. But just know that you're also creating a separate SharePoint site associated with it. It's not a bad thing. It's just be aware of that in case that's something that you don't want. There's also some limitations of private channels at the moment, because as far as adding other applications by default, like Planner, for example, you can't just create a plan from it. It just takes a little bit more effort to build that out. So that's one of the things I wanted to show relative to teams and the channels. The other thing I'll notice, if you come up here, if you click on the breadcrumbs under the private channel, I can manage the channel. I can manage the channel versus up here. Excuse me. I'm managing the team, right? So that's one of the things that's different. you know, gosh darn it, sorry, I'm getting a little click happy here. There's just differences in how you're managing this channel, because it basically kind of breaks this group structure and only applies a specific membership to the people that you assign. So that's important because, for instance, what if this was your, in fact, I was going to create another one as an example. I want to create a team that's called client collaboration. Okay, so I'm going to create a team. I'm going to build it from scratch. I'm going to build it as a private, because I only want people that need permission to sign. I'm going to say client team collaboration. Okay, so now what I'm doing, I'm creating a team. So for instance, when I add members to this team, it just popped up down here. I'm going to add Stephanie to it again, and I'm going to the internal access here. And I'm going to add Gerald internally. That didn't work. Gerald internal access. So I'm going to add the member access. So I'm just going to start there. But if I want to then, so now I've got a client team collaboration, and the general channel always comes through. But what if I'm trying to create a space where I want to collaborate with individual clients, and the documents that I want to collaborate, I don't want them to, I don't want to share the client A's documentation with client B's documentation. So that's where you might be able to create a parent team here, but you might have it so that every team has a private, every client might have their own private channel. And so you're going to have to come in here and click, now that you're in here, say manage or add a channel. And you could say this is client A and make it private. Now that's going to be creating that channel, making it private, and say, who do you want to have access? Well, now I'm going to say, well, I want Stephanie, but I want her external, I want her guest. It'd help if I could spell. Oh, it's not. Oh, you know what? It's not letting me add anybody externally because I haven't permissioned this account to add people externally. So that's an example where it's not giving me external access, because in creating this as a power user, I don't have the permission to make that guest access. So great illustration of the point that it has to be set up by a global admin, and that permission has not been set. So, but that's an example of where you might need to create separate channels that are private if you only want to add information for the respective clients. So versus if you're having multiple channels. So that was some of the key things I wanted to talk about as far as allowing guest access depending on what you're trying to do. Because, you know, this could be, you know, like for the marketing team, as I mentioned, you might have an event planning team, but if you want to enable guest access for this, you can't just add guests just to this channel, because this is a public channel. So by adding them to this, you're adding them to the whole team, and you might not want that. So you might either need to create a separate team that you allow the guest access to everything in the team, or I could potentially recreate a channel that might say event collaboration, and then only add the external vendors that I want to collaborate. Okay, so those are things that I wanted to make sure to hit on as far as the standard team versus private channel, and then potentially creating, you know, how you can use like a board of directors example as we have here of creating a private channel, as well as if, for instance, you had multiple clients that you wanted to create, so and making, say, client A, client B, client C, etc. But just know that when you look at how it pops up in a browser, is that you would have the main guest access team, or the client collaboration team, or the board of directors team. Any public channels would be available here as far as like the folder and collaboration structure. But if you needed it to be private, where you don't want to have everyone have access to everything, you need to create a private channel where it's going to look like this. It's going to have the name of the core channel dash name of the private channel. So this could be client A, client B, client C, etc., depending on how you might set up that structure. Hopefully that makes sense. There's just, and again, because the key functionality that we're talking about here is not any different than what you can do internally with Teams. It's just making sure that you're only sharing the information with the right people. So that's really where there's more thought process and understanding of the structure to help define what you're trying to accomplish, so that when you build this structure, you're adhering to the security parameters and the requirements of what you need. So that takes me back to, you know, basically, I'm going to kick this off again. It takes me back to really, what are some of the key things for you to think through as you're trying to use guest access scenarios that may benefit your organization? Think about some of those ways. Are you trying to do an event? Are you trying to do client collaboration? Is it peer or vendor partner collaboration, volunteer collaboration? Think about the people that's having access. How confidential is information? Is a team that's just a guest access team where any of the channels you create is good enough? Or do you need to restrict those permissions a little bit more? For instance, if you have client A versus client B versus client C, or a board of directors governance, for example. Or maybe you have a volunteer team, but you have a volunteer leadership team or a volunteer coaching team or a volunteer management team where maybe you're collaborating with documents inside of that. And so you make that a private channel, but everything else is public to those guests. Just things to think about as you're trying to identify the guest access scenarios that might benefit your organization. As you think through the permissions and who needs access to what, that's important to know which method will work best for you. And then whether it's with the power user, again, the whole goal for us is we're trying to enable those power users for our clients with this knowledge so they can help you think through these steps that might help you, then that can help you build out a structure that fits your requirements. Now, if your power user doesn't feel comfortable with that yet, we are obviously here to help and happy to help. That is part of what we do. But we want to enable you to be as autonomous as you want to be relative to deploying this structure to fit your needs. And then finally, deploy and train the necessarily internal and external parties. So that I can't emphasize that enough, because what we're talking about here is really changing people's behavior or modifying people's behavior to collaborate in a different way or gain access to information in a different way. And guest access doesn't just mean in Teams, it's also SharePoint. It could also be that they might use OneDrive. It could also be that they want to connect it to their mobile device. So being intentional about that and identifying the power users or maybe train the trainer, who are your go-to resources, but thinking about how you intend on using this guest access, train your internal team on it, train your external parties on how to access it, because don't assume that they know how to do it. That's definitely been something that we've seen. And the other little tip that we've learned too, that this doesn't affect everybody, but every once in a while you get someone, especially if it's a board member, or it could be anybody actually, but someone that might be afraid to raise their hand and say, I don't know how to do this, because that might make them feel dumb, and they don't want to appear, they don't want to get that impression. They don't have other people to know that they didn't know how to do something. That's a common thing that we found. And so it might be something that you do to optionally, instead of doing a team training, which you might want to do to start, but reach out to people individually and make sure they feel comfortable with it. And it might be that they'd feel more comfortable asking questions individually than in a group setting. Again, that doesn't apply to everyone, but there's definitely those folks that we've found as we've gone through this process with our clients, and where that is a variable that I missed initially, because that's not typically my personality. But there's definitely folks that just don't want to feel like they're fumbling around when they're part of a group setting. So think about that as you deploy it, but just know that training is an important part of it, so that people understand not only the team's facets of it, the SharePoint functionality, as well as how OneDrive might fit into their equation too. Again, we have sessions that goes deeper into every single one of those facets that I mentioned, but really I wanted to focus in on the key pieces around creating guest access for yourself. Okay, so lastly, I would say, share those sessions. I mentioned a lot of those sessions in this one today, which is why I wanted to put this one up, saying share those past sessions. That we'll send a link out for everyone that are referenced on mytech.com. We have around 30 sessions of different types of topics to help people navigate through these. Please share them with your colleagues if they make sense to help them on their journey if you're trying to solve these problems. We have new events coming soon that are going to be posted nearly through the end of 2020. I know that sounds crazy that it's only August, but we're going to have a bunch of more sessions coming up. But also join us for our future virtual sessions, and in particular, the power user groups. If you have that power user designated, we'd love to have them attend those monthly sessions, because we're really going deeper with them so that they can help you navigate scenarios like this that we're covering today. So thank you very much for attending. I know that this was less show and more tell, but it was important, I think, to help people understand some of the structure and the nuances, so you don't kind of step on your own toes and accidentally share information or create a structure that doesn't fit what you're trying to accomplish. We're here to help, and so for those who need to drop off, thank you so much for attending, and you'll get a follow-up email with with all the links to reference information that I mentioned. And for those that can stick around, I'd love to open it up for Q&A and any questions you might have relative to enabling and creating the right structure for guest access. So with that said, thank you very much. And Stephanie, let's open it up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Nate. We do not have any questions as of right now, so I don't know if there's something else you could show. Just allow people a couple minutes to post their questions. I
will, yeah. So one of the things that I had kind of in my back pocket is when I didn't talk about OneDrive at all in this whole scenario. So it's one of those things where it may very well may be that if I'm a part of this, let's say I'm an event planner, or if or not event planner, if I'm collaborating on an event, or if I'm on a board and I want to not have to navigate SharePoint, you can enable it so that they just click the sync button right here. And if I click sync, it's going to basically download and keep, it's not going to download. It's going to basically create links in my OneDrive for these folders. So for instance, I'll click this right now. I believe it should work because I'm on my MyTech, and I'll say yes. So it's basically syncing this library down to my computer, and I'll show you what that looks like. Yeah, it's asking me to sign in, because I'm logged in as mytech.com on my computer, but my tenant account. So let me do this really quick. There we go. So I'm logging in to OneDrive and denoting that. So what you're going to see, it's great. Yep, I'm good. I don't need to get to know OneDrive, but thank you, Microsoft. So I'm going to open up a browser, or excuse me, a file explorer window, which is your typical file folder. I'm going to open that up so you can see what that looks like. So now, when you click on, I'm going to just click on the OneDrive. So Contoso. So this is what I just downloaded. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So I just clicked on Contoso, right? So when I click sync here, what it does, it basically it took this folder, which is, notice, guest access team documents. So it's this folder. It basically said that this is the company SharePoint because it's got the building icon, and this is the folder that I'm syncing. And so notice now that I've got this selected, that you see the general and the vendor partner A, but you don't see the private channel because it is not syncing that. So this is one of those things that if you have, this gets to the training comment that I was mentioning at the end of the session, is that if you have folks on your team that they're very used to and comfortable with the way to access information via their file explorer, and if it's something you want to allow, again, that's something you have to think about, is that this is a way in which you can help maybe those less savvy folks be able to access information. It's also very convenient. So if it's not necessarily about being less savvy, it's also that I really like being able to sync because it allows me to, instead of going into Teams and navigating to SharePoint and opening files, I can go right to my file explorer if I might already have that open. So that's, and the thing that I really like about that I encourage folks, if you haven't thought about this before, is I encourage you to, especially for those less savvy folks, but even for everyone else on your team, if you want them to, if you think this would be valuable for them, is just walk them through this one time, because all they have to do is click sync right here like I did one time and make sure that it syncs to their machine. And if it syncs to their machine, it will always sync. So they don't have to worry about doing it every time or anytime a document changes or you add a folder. It will just always sync at the structure, at the level that you where you said, hey, I want to sync. So that's one of the things that I feel for a guest access is maybe something to consider, whether or not you want to allow people to be able to sync it to OneDrive, or if you got those folks that are less savvy, clicking sync, teaching them how to do that and walking them through how to do that is a way where it's really easy to do, but people don't necessarily do it unless you show them how to do it and walk them through those couple clicks they might have to make it work. So I've got one other one, Stephanie, that I had kind of in my back pocket to prompt some questions, but I'll pause, see if there are any questions that may have prompted.
One did come up.
Okay.
This says, regarding Teams live events, wondering how to provision a team or channel with the least amount of access to the organization while still allowing them to be a guest presenter for a live event.
Okay, good. Interesting question. So you don't, okay, so we're talking about guest access to live events. I think it's independent of channels. And the interesting thing is we actually did a session on this, And the ability to access a live event is actually, this is a really weird one. It's tied to the license of the person whom you're inviting. Let me say that again. So if you, for instance, are inviting me to be a guest presenter on your live event, if my Microsoft 365 account, again, my naustin@mytech.com, has access to if my account is licensed with the license that allows me to be part of a live event, which I think is we've got it listed, but it's E3 or E5. It basically explains it's not the basic license. You have to have at least one level up of elevation, and we can post that in the follow-up too, because again, we did a whole session on this, and I do have the information, but off the top of my head, I don't remember. But it is an elevated license. So if my account has an elevated license, I can access. I should be able to participate as a guest in the live event. Now, some of you may recall that we did a panel event back in July, and I verified with each one of the panelists that their individual accounts had that license, so that we should have been good. But even with that, I would recommend testing it, because we had one problem. One of the problems was that they were trying to connect via web browser. So the other thing about live events is that you really need to connect via the Teams app. So whatever device from which you're connecting also should be using the full-blown Teams desktop or desktop laptop app versus the browser. So it's really two things that allow guests to participate. One, they got to connect from the Teams app, and two, their Microsoft login account needs to have access. So let's say, last little tidbit, let's say your guest does not have that access for the live event. Well, what we've done is we actually created an extra account, just an extra login that's a generic login that has the right permissions. And so instead of going to them and saying, hey, you need to upgrade your Microsoft licensing in order to participate, we just have shared that guest login so they can join as a general account that we've created that has the right permissions. So I think that answers your question. Like I said, we can follow up with what those specific licensing requirements, as I mentioned, but I think that answers your question relative to live events.
Awesome, thanks, Nate. Yeah, and I just posted the Microsoft Teams live events session in the Q&A channel as well, which I believe has all of those credentials, or you went through the licensing and that. So
yeah. And there's, like, if you want to just you don't have to listen to the whole 30 minutes or whatever session, just fast forward to like the first 5-10 minutes, and there will be a slide that covers that I talk through that, because it's one of those public service announcements that we always do whenever those idiosyncrasies are presenting themselves, to be able to accomplish what you're trying to do. We try and mention those things ahead of time so that you don't have that kind of gotcha. So check that out, and that has the information you're looking for. The thing that doesn't have is the creating a potential generic account, because I didn't talk about that, and the fact that you need to connect from a Teams app, not the browser. That was another little idiosyncrasy that's good to make sure that you reference as well. Awesome.
There's no further questions.
Okay, well, I want to show one other thing, and then if there's no questions after that, we will adjourn. So I'm going to pull up Teams here. So one of the things I think is also good to know that if you are creating this team structure, so like for instance, if this is your organization's guest access team that I'm highlighting here, this is how you see it. So meaning that you could be part of the operations team and the board of directors and all of these, but if the guest access team is sitting here, you see it as just part of your regular team's structure, your team and channel structure. But if I'm a guest, this is not how I see it. In fact, one of the things you'll note, and it's a little hard to see, but you see this little drop down up here? If you are a member, or if you've been invited, if your account has been invited to participate as a guest to another team, a different organization's team, you will see this drop down. If you have not been, if your account has not been added, so for any of you looking at your teams right now and you're trying to find that drop down, if you have not been invited as a guest to another organization's team's environment, you will not see it. The drop down will not exist. So so don't look, if you don't see it, it's because you're probably not a guest of another team's organization or organization's team structure. But if you do see it, this is what your guests will see. So I'm going to click on this little thing here. And notice it's showing me that I'm logged into the Contoso environment, which is the demo environment that we're showing today, and that here I'm invited as a guest to MyTech partners. So again, notice that this is what I see if I'm part of the organization, but I have a different, in the MyTech environment, we've created a guest account to show this. So I'm going to click on MyTech partner. Oh, you know, I can't click on that. Let me do it in the browser. Because if I click on that right now, it would log me out of this session and I would lose contact with all of you. So I'm glad I didn't click that. But what I will do is open it up in a browser. I'm going to click in office.com. Hopefully it logs me in as, if I would have thought ahead, I would have set this a little bit better. I'm going to click into Teams. It might try and authenticate me because it typically tries to log me in as because I'm logged into my MyTech account on the computer. But in this browser, I'm logged into the guest environment. So I think it's going to do it. Here we go, please, because then I can show it in the guest environment here. Yes, here we go. All right, so I'm in the browser now and I can do this in the browser. So I click this here in the browser and I'm going to click over to the MyTech guest as it's trying to load. I'm going to click on that. So now what it's basically doing is it's logging me, kind of logging me out of my primary corporate teams, and it's effectively logging me into and creating showing me a different environment for the guest account. So notice all I see as a guest is the team to which I'm invited as a guest. Now, if there were other channels here, I would see those too, or if I was a part of a private channel here, I would see those as well. But just note that while it shows me that I'm logged in here, it's not giving me access to any of the other team structure in my organization. It's one of the ways in which Microsoft is keeping the security distinct, but it's also important that I think that for those of you that are thinking about going down this path, that you're aware of what your guest might experience and what they might see. And so again, I'm going to click back and notice that this dropdown will exist if you invited as a guest. And now I'm just going to click back into the Contoso environment. So as you kind of see, it's kind of logging me out, and then it's logging me back in to my corporate environment, and then I will see back to my team structure. So that was the only other thing that I didn't cover during the regular session that I thought would be a good little tip for you to know relative to creating guest access and what your invited guests would see, but they would have access to the same information that you're sharing, you know, when you do it. It's just they basically have to click that little drop. I'm pointing over there because my screen's over there. They have to click that little drop down in order to access the information. So, and they would see a little indicator too that hey, there's something over here. Like if you created a post over there or something like that, there would be a little indicator, just like you have notifications in your team's environment, that there's something there. So they would know to be able to click out and click into that environment. Or the other thing that might be nice, as I've just done here, is that I'm in the browser right now, and I could click over here. So I'm going to click over here. I'm going to click back to MyTech. I'm just going to confuse my Teams browser. But in my Teams app, so this is my Teams app, I could stay in my corporate environment, but in my browser, I could choose to move over to the Teams guest environment, right? Now, again, if you're trying to participate in a live event, or if you're trying to, there's certain things you can't do in the browser that you have to be in the app to do, but if you're just chatting and accessing files and collaborating in that regard, you definitely could keep your Teams app on your corporate environment, and then use your Teams browser to be logged into potentially the guest environment if that's beneficial and helpful. So with that, Stephanie, I will pause for any final questions, but hearing none, we'll adjourn.
Nope, there's no questions.
All right, well, thanks everybody for attending today. Again, stay tuned to those future sessions. And I really encourage, I can't emphasize enough that we really want to empower you as either group owners, team owners, and or power users to be able to optimize and customize these tools for you. So if you're interested in that, please join us on our power user sessions, our power user groups that we do every month, because we are trying to, our goal with that is to train you and teach you and to answer any of those kinds of questions to help you understand the structure and the nuances of how Teams and SharePoint and the backend structure work, so that you can optimize these tools to best suit your needs. We're of course here to help as doing these events, but we want you to be as autonomous as you feel comfortable being. All right. In the meantime, stay safe and healthy out there, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Have a great day.